Howdy. Howdy. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. Just to continue where Brian left off there. We stand on your shoulders. We covet your prayers. I'm in my second term serving now Gregg and Upshur counties. Used to serve Northern Smith. But the longer you're there, the harder it is to do the right thing. So pray for us that God would give us integrity, that He would give us wisdom and courage to do what's right. Ultimately, though, as Psalm 146 says, our hope is not in Austin, Brian, Matt, or me, or Washington. It's in the Lord who reigns today and forever. There is a place for government, but force can only do so much. What we really need to do is to pray for revival and for reformation of hearts and minds. I'd like to just briefly go through a few slides, and I'm going to bypass. Oh, here we go. I'm supposed to do this. There we go. I'm going to just give a brief overview of what I want to do today, and I'm going to speed through most of this. I want to talk about the numbers, then about the laws and policies, and some reforms on the federal and state level. Then some broad principles are really the target of what we want to preserve. And then, along with that, talk about our messaging. First of all, about the numbers. I want to give a breakdown about the illegal entries. First of all, they are overwhelming, but they're not unprecedented. I'll get to that. First, you'll see here on this slide, about 25% of the illegal entries that, of course, people that we're detaining. And so qualify that whole slide by that. And there are other people that are coming that we're not detaining. But those that we are detaining, 25% of them are Mexican. Then about 20% of those are minor children, and at least when we find them unaccompanied. Then 30% are families with children, and then 25% are basically other adults primarily. With respect to the Mexicans, we do repatriate them same day. We're thankful for that. That doesn't always get out. But with respect to the children and the families, they are seeking really asylum. Now, many of them probably or may not receive that, but that's what they're ones coming and just giving themselves up. They're not seeking to avoid arrest, I think, for the most part. The others probably are. That gives you a little overview of what's happening. That's about the breakdown. The number of Mexicans is between 20 and 25%. So that may vary a little bit and would change things. I'd like to show now this slide speaking about the numbers.
Brandon Darby and James O'Keefe are watching.
First of all, notice the exponential increase between fiscal year 2013 and 2014. We went from 30,000 to 110,000 families and children. So 276% increase. And then notice as well, Texas makes up about 80%, 88%, almost 90% of all those detained on the southwest border of families and minor children. And then for 2014, based upon those results published by the Customs and Border Patrol, we're going to see an increase by the end of the fiscal year of about 130, total of about 132,000 or 351% increase. And as I said, this is not a wholly new problem. We did encounter, this is 2014, as of the end of May, 162,000 other than Mexicans. In 2013, 153. Back in 2005, we did have 165,000 people come as well. And it's a shame that we didn't learn then how to handle this problem. But things are not only overwhelming down there, they're dysfunctional. I've heard a little bit about this, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but the promise to peers, the tickets that are given to these immigrants because we can't handle all the processing at once, is basically undermining the rule of law. And they're calling back home, that's the second point there, and they're telling families that they received a permissio. They received their permission to enter the country, and that's in fact really de facto true. They're at that point somewhat legally here, even though it hadn't been finally determined. The other thing that's dysfunctional is we are entrusting these children to families that we haven't fully vetted. And many of them are probably also here illegally. And they might even prey upon those children. And it's a tragedy. There's other dysfunctionalities. If you compare what we do with the legal entries to illegal, with respect to background checks, we take about 2 years for legal entries or applications. Just a matter of days for illegal. Medical screenings are cursory, and they're more in depth for those who are coming legally. It's just upside down. And then we provide K through 12 education for students, but they're not going to be able to receive a driver's license. And if we implement E-Verify, these educated students are not going to be able to get to work legally. We have a dysfunctional system. We attract illegal entry and residents here in our country by providing a lot more health care than just what is critical and emergency, and by giving them education. We'll talk more about that just briefly. We also attract immigrants to this country because we have a vacuum. We were paying people almost 2 years not to work. Thankfully, that has been suspended now, and it's about a half a year. But that's wrong, and that causes people not to get a job when they can go to the mailbox. We have basically laws and policies that have produced this situation, and it's not just under Obama. It's not just in the last few years. It's been decades in the making. But there are the 2008 law about human trafficking has been abused and has led to many unintentional consequences. No doubt many of the children perhaps are truly fleeing very desperate situations. Honduras has the worst murder rate in the world of 90 out of 1,000. And frankly, I don't blame some of the people for coming. No, they should come legally. But if you're leaving a burning building and you jaywalked to flee danger, I dare say that we wouldn't really talk about jaywalking. We'd be talking about them fleeing to safety. There is a place for mercy, and this law was, in 2008, recognized that, but it's had some unintended consequences, and no doubt many people are being trained just to say that they are seeking asylum and creating some fiction, perhaps. But then again, there well may be serious safety issues, and we do not want to turn our back upon those people and send them back to be trafficked, to be enslaved, to be perhaps murdered if they don't run packages for the drug cartel. But of course, the other issue is recently, in 2012, our president instituted by himself the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Y'all probably all heard a lot about this before, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But that has really exacerbated the problem and aggravated it. And if you compare the number of deportments from President Bush to President Obama, they decrease substantially through the last 10 years. It's interesting, though, under Obama, the forced deportments have actually increased. Well, what can the U.S. do? Well, we can provide more resources at the border. We've already talked about that. We can allow law enforcement to go into those federal areas along the border that were prevented now, except for the DPS when they're in hot pursuit. We can swiftly deal with those who are seeking asylum at the border and quickly. It's more expensive and to send these children all over the place, and we need, if it's beyond our limits, we just say we can't do anymore, and we have to just send them back. Most of us, if we had a crisis and we needed to receive people in our home and give them food, we'd do as much as we can, but then there would be a limit. And we'd have to just turn them away, and others would have to pick up the slack, or they just have to fend them for themselves. There's only so much we can do. We need to reduce government welfare and rely upon charity. When the government enters into charity, so to speak, it's a subsidy, and it actually attracts more and makes people more dependent. When we do it voluntarily, we withdraw that when it is abused because we love the person too much. The government just wants to make a bigger job for itself. Let's see there. And then, perhaps most important, but maybe the most difficult to accomplish, is we need to require legal status for birthright, citizenship. Well, what can Texas do? You'll have to excuse me, I can't read my own slide here. Yeah, I want to try to face y'all up. We need to require compliance with the federal law. We could ask when they come to our public schools, make sure that they have appeared as they promised. And we could track those numbers, which would help us in our argument with the federal government. We could reduce the government safety net to more reasonable levels, by reducing unemployment payments and providing only emergency health care that is critical. And then we need to overturn the mandate to educate aliens who have entered the country illegally or who are still residents of Mexico. We have many who are crossing the bridges with cards, entering our schools at our expense, and then returning home to Mexico every day. I didn't get to see it. I did hear about it by David Watts, who witnessed it, but I was down there during summer break. What we need, how do we do that? Well, we overturn a case called Plyler versus Doe. And I'm going to let the attorneys talk more about that if they need to. But that case arose here in Smith County in 1977 and was decided by the Supreme Court in 1982 that basically requires us to provide free education to illegal immigrants or undocumented school-age children. I'm going to just pass over that, but there's a way we could do it, but it would end up, if we passed the law, it would no doubt be immediately contested, and we'd have to take it all the way to the Supreme Court, so it's not an immediate solution. One thing I want to just briefly talk about, and that is effective messaging. This is a very emotional issue. It's probably the hottest issue. We need to keep in mind that our goal is not just to secure the border. Our goal is to change the hearts and minds of our neighbors so that they understand why that is important. And if we don't do that, it'll be quickly opened again and not controlled. And so we need to keep that in mind. We need to engage people with meekness, that's gentle strength, with wisdom and patience. We need to avoid the harsh rhetoric and remember a soft answer turns away wrath. We need to try to find some common ground with people when we are talking about this issue and debating it. Many times the Tea Party is ineffective in my estimate, and I count myself a part of it, because we are not meek. We're pictured as just putting the babies and the children in a catapult, sending them back on the other side of the river, pointing a gun. I've heard it said, just take over Mexico. And I said, well, how'd that work in Iraq? I've heard, well, let's shoot 2 or 3 of those children and the rest will learn it. That's not the way to do things. We do not want to become like the countries that these people are fleeing. We want to uphold the rule of law. And we want to have mercy. Mercy makes no sense except in the context of justice. We need to speak the truth in love. And we need to pray that the truth would enter the heart and the mind. You know, that's our problem in Iraq. We've used a lot of force over there, and probably $1 trillion or $2. But it's going right back the way it was. The gospel is what we need, where people are changed from the inside out. Well, I'm pretty much out of time, so I just end with these broad principles. What should we be shooting for in the right way? What's our target? What's our goal? It's to secure and control the border. We don't want to be like Berlin, where we wall people out and wall people in, like the Soviet Union. We want freedom of travel and movement, but we want to stop the wrongdoer. We want to stop the drug cartels. We want to stop the terrorists. We need to enforce the laws and the penalties and distinguish between serious crimes and crimes of lesser violations against order. We don't punish traffic violations the same way we do vandalism, theft, and murder, thankfully. Now, if it's aggravated, it can be a serious penalty. But I dare say some of us have acted illegally already here today. We need not to be good Pharisees or scribes. And we need to remember to apply the same law, even though some people have come here in the wrong way. And I do believe we need to talk about not only controlling the border and securing it, but we need to talk about that there is a place for asylum and for refugees. Our Puritan forefathers were such, and many of those here. But we did turn away lots of Jews at the end of World War II, regrettably. And we need to talk about a reasonable, understandable way of facilitating and increasing, in my opinion, legal immigration and ultimately, in some cases, naturalization. Anyway, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you, and I'm pretty much through with my slides. I just would close with this 2 slides real quick. The scripture says, in Proverbs 14:28, in the multitude of a people is a king's honor, but the lack of a people is the downfall of a prince. You know, our greatest resources are not oil and gas. They're people. They're like you and me. And our forefathers who came here from other places. And we need to remember that as we talk about this. These people right here are Mexicans. And they were on a train coming to South Texas when most of the men were either in the Pacific fighting for freedom or in Europe fighting for freedom. And we would not have harvested our crops in South Texas without them. And those men wouldn't have gone without their help. The other thing, we need to remember that most people, not the terrorists, not the criminals, but there are a lot of people coming for hope. 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 But true hope is not in dependence upon the government. But as Lady Liberty held in her arms there on that tablet had marked July 4th, they're coming and should come And we should allow them to come if they're hardworking and fear God and will keep our laws for independence, just like our forefathers. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your attention.
Okay, let's get our questions. David, you've got the honor of having the first question.
Okay, who has it?
It says, why has the majority of the increase of illegals been in the Rio Grande sector, lower Rio Grande Valley up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
Well, it's because of the easy access, or ocean easy, the most readable access by trains and roads, the shortest distance between South America and the Rio Grande Valley. It's a lot farther to Del Rio, Presidio, El Paso. And if y'all remember, probably seen pictures of the trains. They ride a train called the Beast, and they ride on top of it. It's very dangerous, but the Mexican government countenances it, and that's how they come. Also, I do believe it's because the focus, there's so many federally protected lands in that portion of our border with Mexico.
You'll pass that to Matt, please. Why are some border and in parentheses Democrat legislative reps not interested in a full offensive tactic on the border issue, which is so impacting their districts? How much is due to corrupt elected officials?
I think that they view it differently. When you go to a place like El Paso, for its size, El Paso is one of the safer cities in America because the type of activity that happens there is not this kind of gang violence that we see. It's different. They feel safer there. Their constituency also is much more interested in the type of welfare programs and social benefits that they're receiving right now. And they do want more lenient immigration laws. Their own constituencies are telling them, don't tighten border policy, but loosen it and move this towards a change in the policy. So for a number of reasons, they want their immigration laws changed in their favor and don't want to do anything that would push it back the other direction.
Okay, those are the only ones I have specifically addressed to an individual. What will it take to get our governor to act responsibly?
Well, he's on his way out in a few months. I can tell you that Governor Perry has taken some action that he's had to push back against probably the Speaker of the House. He has had to push back against members of his own party. So can we sit here and maybe say Governor Perry should do more and can do more? Yes. But to his credit, he has done more than many would. So I don't know the answer to that. I think the more relevant point will be to see what kind of specific actions Greg Abbott is going to lay out for us.
Following that up, should Governor Rick Perry use the Texas Guard to secure our border?
Absolutely, I'd do much more.
Is it correct that the federal government counts as deportation the giving of the court date paper to illegals? Obama's administration brags about the huge number of deportations they've done. I don't believe them.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you, David?
Repeat the question. I think I understood you. Just
When someone is told to show up for the hearing, do they count that as a deportation?
I can't answer that. I can say, as I mentioned in my slide presentation, that Obama's forced deportations have been more than President Bush's. But overall has been substantially less. That's a different answer to a different question. But
how do the families who have limited means get thousands of dollars to pay the coyotes?
two primary ways. One is they have relatives and friends in the United States that are going to Western Union and sending them money. Secondly, there is an economy in Central America and Mexico, and the drug economy still exists. So they do, maybe their life savings, but many of them are getting money by wire transfer from the United States, from relatives and friends there.
Can you explain how Obama and the left can get votes by illegal people who are not citizens and really not even eligible to vote?
Obviously, that's why voter ID is so important, and that's why they fight us so hard on that. So that's why we need to push back on that.
Please explain the role of a game warden in the border issues.
Okay, so the game wardens are, of course, they're certified Texas peace officers, well-trained, know the way around the woods. So in addition to DPS troopers, we're sending a lot of game wardens down there, and they're spending extra time on the border. And they're certified peace officers, well-armed, they communicate with DPS and with Border Patrol. So they're doing great work. I mean, they're making arrests, they're stopping people from crossing.
When are we going to invite the Texas militia to help defend the border? When is Texas going to repeal and deport regardless of what the feds say?
So Texas has what's called the Texas State Guard that is not under the authority of the federal government. However, this is not the type of security force that you think of when you think of National Guard or law enforcement. They don't have guns. They're professionals. They're smart guys that have professional expertise, but they're not the kind of guys that you would put out in the field, and they're a very small number of them. One thing I am interested in doing is perhaps advancing an initiative that would give the governor greater authority to create a border-focused force, security force that's owned and operated and resourced and under the authority of the governor and could never be subject to recall by the president.
And I think there is some constitutional basis for that. I'm just going to suggest something here for study. We've been mainly focused on Article 1, Section 8, dealing with uniform laws of naturalization and making and enforcing the laws of nations. And then in 10, what the state can and cannot do, particularly under emergencies, what they can do. But in Section 9, which deals primarily with the migration and importation at the time it was written of slaves, it's interesting that it prohibited the federal government from prohibiting the states from importing certain persons or allowing people to migrate. And it says you shall not prohibit them from migration and importation until 1808. And of course we know that's when the slave trade ended. But it's interesting as it talks about there in that clause, as such states shall admit, and I don't know that it's limited merely to slaves. And so to me, Section 8 points the way to a concurrent jurisdiction for immigration, and that the states were seen as sovereign themselves, and that they were to work together through the federal government. Anyway, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I have not seen anything that undermines that. There may be. And there's probably a lot of federal law that would probably hinder us from going in that direction. But I do think it's a nugget, a beachhead that we might want to pursue in establishing concurrent jurisdiction with the federal government for immigration.
When children are turned over to family members, are the family members paid to care for them until a trial?
Not to my knowledge.
I will say that under current United States Department of Agriculture policy, when you read their stuff right off their website, refugees and asylees are entitled to food stamps without delay.
Why are border stations moved 45 miles further away from the border? Won't that allow for a more lawless area within the area of the borders and 45 miles from it?
It doesn't make any sense. It's a policy of this president. It just doesn't make any sense.
And I would only follow up, that's what the feds do. Our DPS troopers are right there. They're on the border. They're much closer, but yeah, those checkpoints are pretty far back.
Has the decrease in number coming across, is it because of the heat?
As a matter of fact, the number of unaccompanied minors has decreased some, and that may be because of the heat, also because of problems with the train in Mexico. I was checking on that this morning. The number of unaccompanied minors is down a little bit, but we're not sure why, and it may be because of the heat. It's a 1,400-mile trek across Mexico. It's probably pretty tough.
What is Senator Eltife's position on these issues?
I haven't spoken. I saw in the paper where he said we should have a special session to deal with it. I haven't spoken to him personally about it, but y'all may know. I saw where he said that in the paper where he wants to deal with the problem, but I don't know any specifics. Y'all know.
What are we doing about the illegals that are already here?
Well, of course, obviously voter ID, which I mentioned, it sounds like a broken record, but it's an important broken record. We want to make sure that only voters are voting. As far as that goes, Matt talked about how folks seeking asylum qualify for food stamps. I want to clarify one thing. In Texas, for Medicaid, food stamps, children's health insurance program, those programs are for citizens only, U.S. citizenship or legal resident, and that has to be verified. So some states are really opening things up and offering all kinds of benefits. Texas is not one of those states. Now, some things the feds require us to offer, but for the big ticket welfare programs, Medicaid, children's health insurance program, those are for U.S. citizens or legal residents only.
Okay. This is an FYI for you gentlemen. Brandon Darby and James O'Keefe were promoting your presentation live, and it was on Ustream TV.
And I don't know, I don't want to hijack the program, but I know everyone's going to want to point this out. We talked about the border. I know one member of the U.S. Congress has been to the border probably more than any other. I've been there with him. He goes in the middle of the night. He goes back where you're not supposed to go. He visits the detention centers. And that's our great congressman, my mentor, Judge Louis Gilbert, who's just come in.
Joanne, I have a question. Could the video please be put on Facebook so that it can be gotten out?
Yes.
Did y'all hear her? Yes.
Last question, Patty.
Well,
One
this,
more question to them.
I have no more for them. This probably is for you. Does Grassroots America support reduced legal immigration to pre-1965 levels?
No, we don't. No, we don't. We think that there's a whole route of reforms that need to take place. If you ever look at the flow chart of what it looks like, the steps that it takes to become an American citizen, it looks like you're looking down into a bowl of spaghetti. It is a bureaucratic-laden nightmare. It should not take people 10, 15, 20 years to become an American citizen if they really want to. It should be streamlined, but it is a bureaucratic nightmare. And by the way, before we start, reversing the clock, we need to get what's on the books. The laws on the books need to be done right. They need to be followed, because we have people that overstay their visas all the time. Words mean things. So if you're supposed to be here for a specific amount of time, we need to have the enforcement in place and make sure that does not happen. Now, we're going to wind up. I'm going to remind you all that if you're a member, you need to stay here for just a few minutes. It won't take but just a little bit. I also need to remind you about next Thursday evening. The information's on your table. Or next Friday, you need to be here. Is a continued education series on the border crisis with Brandon Darby. I'm hoping he brings Ildefonso Ortiz an undercover, a guy that does a lot of investigative reporting, and some border agents. So I invite you all to be here. And I think that's it. Anything else, guys, that I'm supposed to remind everybody about? Okay, so I want you to stand up and tell everybody who you are. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
We the people! We the people! We the people!
Thank you.